Well, friends, our scripture lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 4, verses 21 through 30, which picks up on our passage from last week. Then he began to say to them, "Today the scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is not this Joseph's son?" He said to them, "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself.' And you will say, 'Do here also in your hometown the things that we have heard you did at Capernaum.' And he said, 'Truly I tell you, no prophet is accepted in the prophet's hometown.' But the truth is, there were many widows in Israel in the time of Elijah, when the heaven was shut up 3 years and 6 months, and there was a severe famine over all the land. Yet Elijah was sent to none of them, except to a widow at Zarephath in Sidon. There were also many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and none of them was cleansed except Naaman the Syrian. When they heard this, all in the synagogue were filled with rage. They got up, drove him out of the town, and led him to the brow of the hill on which their town was built, so that they might hurl him off the cliff. But he passed through the midst of them and went on his way." Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Well, one of the things about being in a church that's, so close to Manhattan is that there are a lot of celebrities associated with us. And so up here on the top left, you have Bill Parcells, the football coach, Alicia Keys there in the top center. On the right is Jeannie Francis, the soap opera star, if any of you were General Hospital fans, okay? And I don't know how many years she played Laura on that show. I don't know if she's still playing Laura. I have no idea, but certainly a really long time. The bottom left, Ed Harris, the actor, and John Travolta. Now, the thing is, Alicia Keys was born in New York but lives in Englewood, and the other four are among the many celebrities who were actually born in Englewood. Okay, so they were all born here, and in fact, Ed Harris was baptized in this church. Okay, and so, and some other folks that remembers Don Knotts, if you remember him, he was a member of this church in the 50s when he was working on Broadway. And so, a lot of folks have connections. Now, the thing about that is that people hear that and they're proud of it, but they also have this tendency to believe that because they have that early connection, that somehow they owe us something. That somehow they owe us because they were from here or live here. And this is kind of what's happening with Jesus. So Jesus, last week, he asked for the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. He reads from the scroll. He speaks very eloquently about what's in there, and then they're so happy. They're proud of him. All spoke well of him. They were amazed at the gracious words, and they go, "Is not this Joseph's son?" And this is not questioning, okay? They're proud of him. They're like, this is our kid. And remember, elsewhere in the Gospels, it talks about how, Nazareth is not highly regarded in that region. Okay? And, people go, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" So they're really proud because they're not thought of highly. So, it's kind of like, for instance, when you have the national spelling bee and a person wins. It's one thing when the person who wins comes from a state that, is known for having good education. It would be a different thing entirely if the person who won came from a state that was ranked like 49th in education. They would be particularly proud, sitting there saying, our schools are ranked so horribly, but look, one of our kids won the national spelling bee, all right? So they're proud to have someone from their town who's able to do this, who speaks so well. Right? And they expect that he's going to bring glory and honor to them. And Jesus then tells them that, no, you're really not going to like what I do. And I'll tell you why you're not going to like what I do. He says, you're going to quote to me this proverb, "Doctor, cure yourself." And by the way, that little phrase in there, "and you will say," is not actually in the Greek. I don't know why the translators felt the need to put it in. When you read the Greek New Testament, it just goes straight through. "Doubtless you will quote to me this proverb, 'Doctor, cure yourself. Do here also in your hometown the things that we have heard you did at Capernaum.'" I think it actually flows better in the Greek New Testament without that phrase, so I don't know why they added it there, and it makes it kind of a continuous thought, Cure yourself. Take care of your own. Do here also in your hometown the things that we have heard you did at Capernaum. See, Jesus knows they're going to be angry with what he actually does in ministry. Which is an odd thing to say to the people. It would be kind of like a politician saying, wait till I'm elected. You're really going to hate what I do. All right? And most of us are like, no, we'll just let that unfold naturally. Okay? But no, he says, you're going to hate it, and you're going to hate it because of what I'm going to do for others. And then he justifies what he's going to do by giving them examples from the Hebrew Scriptures, giving them examples from their own history that they are really familiar with. Okay? And so he says, look, there was a famine in the land, and yet Elijah, the great prophet Elijah, wasn't sent to anyone except the widow at Zarephath. There was a great famine and many widows who were suffering. But who did God send Elijah to? Someone who's off in this other land. Zarephath is in Phoenician territory. It's not Israelite territory. He sends Elijah to them, not to one of your own. I mean, how often have you heard people say, we need to take care of our own first? And Jesus says, look, this is not how God works. God doesn't do it that way. And there's a reason. He sends Elijah to the widow at Zarephath, and if you go back into 1 Kings and look at the end of the story, 1 Kings chapter 17, what happens is after she is fed, after her son is healed, and the woman said to Elijah, now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord is in your mouth is truth. This expanded the belief in God by going outside of God's people. The Israelites expect their God to serve them, to do for them. But it expanded belief in God to go beyond their people and spread elsewhere. And he gives a second example about the other great prophet Elisha who had succeeded Elijah. And he says, look, there were many lepers in Israel in the time of the prophet Elisha, and the only story we have of a cleansing is Naaman the Syrian. He was a Syrian military commander of all things, a person ready to make war against the Israelites, and he gets healed. Instead of healing Israelites, Elisha heals Naaman the Syrian. Yet again, the net effect of this is that what it produces is an expansion of belief. When Naaman is healed, what he says is, now I know that there is no God in all the earth except in Israel. He says, I know. This is the one true God. And this is a really important story and an important statement because so many people to this day want God to be on their side. Right? We want God to be on our side. Now today, we fight over the fact that we think God is on our side even though we agree that there's only one God. We want to claim that one God for ourselves. In ancient times, there was actually a cleaner divide. They simply had different gods. And they would say, well, we have our gods, you have your gods. And our gods are the right gods. Our gods are the true gods. Your gods are the false gods. Your gods are the weak gods. And they used to settle that in war. So it used to be like, if we go to war, we're just proxies. My army against your army is really a proxy for my gods versus your gods, and whichever gods win, that army is going to win. But God is trying to end sides. Right? God isn't trying to take sides. God is trying to end sides. And this is actually, and I mention this in sermons pretty often because I think it's really important for us to remember, that this is the actual key to monotheism. All right, so we need to remember this. When we talk about how the great advance of Judaism was to be monotheistic in a polytheistic culture, the issue was not just that their gods numbered one, all right? That wasn't the big issue. The big issue was that it was the one God over everything. See, remember, it was different territories. My land, my territory has my pantheon of gods. Your land, your territory has your pantheon of gods. And if we had said that our pantheon only has one God in it, that wouldn't have been such a conceptual shift. They would have simply said, oh, you poor people, you only have one God. We've got like 17. We're better. All right. But the real shift was to say, no, you don't understand. Our one God is not just the God of our land. It's not just the God of our people. It's not just the God of our territory. It's not just the God of our army. It's also the God of your land. It's the God of everything there is. The God of the heavens and the earth, the God that was before the beginning of time and will be beyond the end of time. It's one God over it all. That was the huge advance. Because none of them, no matter how many gods they had, believed that their gods cared about anybody else. Our gods care about us. They're our gods. I care about you. But in our faith, the love of God is known by its breadth. It's known by the fact that our God's love is not limited to us. It is such a discrediting thing to the love of God to try and claim that it only applies to you, that it only applies to your people, that it only applies to our kind, whatever it is, however we want to say that the love of God is localized and limited, it discredits the love of God. And Jesus understood that this was an unpopular thing to be promoting, but that he was here to promote that idea, and he knew that the people would be really upset by it because they wanted Jesus to be theirs. And so he says, truly I tell you, no prophet's accepted in the prophet's hometown. Because the hometown expects more. The hometown expects favoritism. But outsiders, they appreciate what insiders take for granted. It's the outsiders. And we see that over and over. Jesus heals 10 lepers, and it's the foreigner who comes back to give thanks, because the insiders take it for granted. The outsiders appreciate it. It's the insiders who have a sense of entitlement, and the insiders who feel they own it. It's the insiders who think they have a right to it, and it is the outsiders who are grateful when it's shown to them. But people think that somehow if you're going to spread the love, you lose the love. It's one of the great lies, this idea that we have to take care of our own before we take care of anyone else. And so when Jesus says that I have not come to just do for you, but look, I'm going to follow God's example that is there throughout the Hebrew Scriptures of trying to expand the range, the breadth of God's love, you're going to be really unhappy. And so it says, they were filled with rage. And it went on to say that they tried to throw him off a cliff. Which preachers love this passage because we like to tell stories of the time our congregations wanted to throw us off a cliff. It's a little riskier here because we're actually only 1.5 miles from a cliff. So you have one handy. But Jesus is saying, you're not going to own me. I'm from here, but you're not going to own me because my mission belongs to the world. And there was a professor of preaching, Fred Craddock, and I love this quote that he had about this passage. He passed away a few years ago, but one of the things he said about this passage, which is really important to remember, is he said, Jesus didn't go elsewhere because he was rejected. Jesus was rejected because he went elsewhere. See, Jesus didn't say, look, I'm going to, you folks have refused to believe in me, and so I'm going to take my message somewhere where they're willing to hear me out. No, it was because he said I'm going elsewhere that the people rejected him. because they didn't want to share what he had to offer. They wanted to keep it for themselves. But the thing about it, whenever you try to control things, whenever you try to say, hey, we need to take care of our own first, hey, we need to take care of ourselves first, hey, I need to look out for number one first, whenever we do that, it's actually a pretty bad strategy. It's a bad strategy in life. It's a bad strategy for society. You know, it's even a bad strategy in business. Right? See, it's a better strategy to care for the least among us. Like, you know, I had my own business for 20 years before I went to seminary, and I know this is true of businesses because whether you've owned a business or not, you know this as a customer, which is this. Which business is going to do better? The business that says, hey, we take care of our biggest clients. Or the business that says, we care about every client. Right? You know the business that cares about every client is going to do better. All right? You know, I used to fly a lot. And there are some airlines that are really well known for taking care of their frequent flyers. They really take care of them. And if you're not a frequent flyer, pretty much your experience is that of cattle being taken to the slaughterhouse. All right. And the thing is, if you look at like customer service rankings of airlines, those airlines always end up at the bottom. Because the thing about it is this. A business that only takes care of its biggest clients doesn't worry so much about the little ones. Even the big clients get to worry about what happens if we're not the biggest client anymore. What happens if a bigger client comes along? What happens if we can't spend as much on that business as we used to? And we get relegated to second-tier status. So even if you're in the favored group, because there is a favored group, you get to worry about whether you would fall out of the favored group. What if the business decides that they need to focus on some other part of their market? They'll leave us behind because they've already said that who they're going to focus on is the people who are important to them, because not everyone is important to them. But the business that says, we don't care if you're a big client or a small client, we take care of you. We care about you. You know what? You never have to worry about it then. Because you know, I'm working with a company that cares about every client, which means that no matter what, whether I give them a lot of business or a little business, they are going to care about me. The minute we believe that God takes sides, that God plays favorites, we get to begin to worry about whether we are in the favored group. We get to worry about whether God's attention is going to be on someone else. We get to worry about whether we're going to do something or be something that will somehow put us in the inattentive category for God. That's why it's a real dangerous place to be. That's why the ancient people always worried about it, because they believed God played that way, their gods played that way, and so they got to believe that every time something happened, they needed to keep their gods appeased, because they thought their God played favorites, and so they continually worried about whether they still had the favor of their gods. We don't worry about that. We don't worry about that. We are the faith that says that absolutely nothing can separate us from the love of Christ. We don't worry about it because God doesn't play favorites. God doesn't take sides. God's love is known by its breadth, and that breadth will always be broad enough to cover us. That's why it's so important for a church to not think that it needs to take care of its own before it takes care of others. Because when we do that, then what we are doing is proclaiming a parochial God, a localized God, a God with whom you can be in favor or out of favor, and that's not the God we worship. And so that's why one of our value statements is share boundlessly, because it's the idea that we will share without borders, without limits. We will show the love of God by its breadth. So it's important for us to remember that loving people at the outer edge of our circles. I mean, we all live life with that. We've got family, we've got close friends. We all have circles around our lives, but loving people at the outer edge of our circles doesn't detract from the people at the middle. It actually deepens the love at the middle. So many of us know that you can tell the quality of a person by how they treat people at the edges of their relationships, right? I mean, I've never seen a person who was nice to a waiter and mean to their guests. And we all know not to trust a person who's nice to their guests and mean to the waiter. You love at the outer edge. You love from the bottom up. And it detracts from no one. It simply makes it better for all. And we end up building a better society and better people when we do it that way, because you build a society. So many people have said that the measure of a society is how well it treats the least among them. If it treats the least well, you know everyone else is being treated well. You build character by how you treat the least of the people in your lives, not just the people who are closest to you, certainly not just the people who can do something for you. That's how you build things better, because the more love you show, the more breadth of that the love is that you show, you are changing the world you live in. Every time you throw some meanness out into the world, you are changing the world and making it meaner. You've made it meaner by what you put out there. You make it more loving by being more loving. And so I want to challenge us to think about ways we can love better at the fringes of our lives, at the edges of our lives, at the bottoms of our lives. It's also a challenge for young children. If you're parents with young kids, you can challenge them to make sure that they're remembering to do that. You know, are your kids remembering not just to be good friends to their best friends, but are they remembering to include those who are left out? Are they remembering the kid who isn't sitting with anyone at lunch or at recess? Although these days I know that's, with COVID, that's a little bit of a different, situation. But are they remembering the ones who are feeling like they're on the fringes and being forgotten on the fringes? Because it won't just make the world better, it will make them better people if they worry about the people on the fringes of their life. It makes us better people when we worry about that. It makes us better businesses when we worry about the least of the customers in our customer base. It makes us a better society when we worry about the least of the citizens in our society. Because we build our lives from the bottom up and from the outside in. And that's how we get better. And that's how Christ built the church. Amen.